So you've heard about COBIT 2019, right? That comprehensive framework for governing and managing enterprise information and technology. It's pretty foundational stuff for a lot of places.
Absolutely. Foundational, yes.
But let's be real, just having a framework, even a great one like COBIT, isn't quite enough. You've got to make it work for your specific organization.
Precisely. Because every single enterprise is different. It's got its own context, its own strategies, different risks, particular needs when it comes to INT. You know, a generic system, even based on COBIT, it's likely to miss the mark if it's not tailored.
And that right there is exactly where the COBIT 2019 design guide comes in. Think of it like the instruction manual for customizing that powerful COBIT engine.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it.
So this deep dive, we're all about unpacking this specific guide. We're going to walk you through its structured approach, step by step, really showing you how it helps build a governance system that fits your enterprise's unique characteristics.
And our goal here, our mission, is really to draw straight from the COBIT 2019 design guide document itself. We're going to break it down so you understand not just what needs tailoring, but the why and the how. How do you design a COBIT system that actually reflects your reality?
Yeah, think of us as your guides for this. We'll walk through this important resource together, highlighting the key ideas and the workflow it lays out.
And the core idea, really, is tailoring. It all starts with the generic COBIT core model, that universal set of objectives and components. But then the guide gives you a systematic way to adapt it.
How does it do that adaptation?
Well, it's driven by these specific things called design factors. And these factors capture what's unique about your enterprise. It's all about moving from that standard blueprint to getting your custom build.
Okay, let's dive in then. We're opening the guide itself. Before we get into the actual design steps, the guide kind of reminds us of some basic COBIT 2019 concepts, right? The foundation it builds on.
Right. Good place to start. So COBIT 2019, it's presented as this umbrella framework for e.g. enterprise governance of information and technology. It builds on COBIT 5, obviously, but it's updated and designed to work alongside, other major standards and frameworks out there.
And the heart of COBIT 2019 is the core model that's built around, 40 governance and management objectives?
Exactly, 40 objectives. And these cover everything for e.g. from figuring out stakeholder needs all the way to monitoring how things are going. They're grouped logically into 5 domains.
Okay, what are those domains again?
So you've got the governance objectives in the evaluate, direct, and monitor domain, that's EDM. And then the management side has 4 domains: align, plan, and organize, APO; build, acquire, and implement, BAI; deliver, service, and support, DSS; and monitor, evaluate, and assess, MEA.
Right, EDM, APO, BAI, DSS, MEA. Got it. And these objectives, they're not just abstract things you tick off a list. The guide emphasizes they're achieved through a system of interconnected components.
Precisely. A governance system isn't just one thing. It's made up of multiple parts that have to work together, holistically. These components are how you actually put the objectives into practice, make them work day to day in the enterprise.
So what kinds of things are these components? Can you give some examples?
Sure. The guide lists 7 types. You've got processes, probably the most familiar one, the workflows and activities, then organizational structures, roles, responsibilities, reporting lines, policies and procedures, the documented rules.
Okay.
Information items, so the data and knowledge you need for governing. Culture, ethics, and behavior, that crucial human element. Skills and competencies, what people need to be able to do. And finally, services, infrastructure, and applications, the tech that enables it all.
Wow, okay. 7 types.
And the guide points out these can be generic, standard components, or they can be tailored versions depending on what you need.
Right, so we've got this universal COBIT model objectives components, but how do you figure out which of those 40 objectives are super critical for your business? Or if you need those tailored components, that's where the design factors you mentioned earlier come in.
That is the absolute key linkage, yes. The design guide identifies 11 specific design factors. These are the characteristics that really define your enterprise's unique context. And crucially, they influence how your governance system needs to be designed.
11 of them. And they're not just broad categories, are they? The guide actually breaks them down.
It does, yeah. It gives them more definition. Take enterprise strategy, for example. It's not just strategy. It's broken into archetypes like growth acquisition, or maybe innovation differentiation, cost leadership, or client service stability, or the role of IT. Is IT mainly seen as support? Or is it a reliable factory? Maybe it's driving a turnaround, or is it truly strategic? Getting that specific nuance for your organization is vital input.
Okay, let's quickly list those 11 again, just so we have them clear. It's Enterprise strategy, enterprise goals, risk profile, INT-related issues.
Threat landscape, compliance requirements, role of IT, sourcing model for IT.
IT implementation methods, technology adoption strategy, and enterprise size. Phew. Okay, so those are the inputs. Now, how do these factors actually impact the tailoring? What does the guide say they do?
Well, the guide explains there are three main ways they have an impact, three types of influence.
Okay, what's the first one?
First up is the impact on management objective priority and selection. So while all 40 objectives in the COBIT model are, inherently valuable, these design factors mean that for your specific enterprise, some objectives just become way more important than others.
More important.
Yes, and that higher importance often translates directly into setting higher target capability levels for the processes linked to those really key objectives.
And setting higher capability levels, what does that practically mean? How does it reflect priority?
Good question. So target capability levels in COBIT, they're basically a measure of how well a process is actually working, how mature it is, usually on a scale from 0 to 5.
Right.
If you set a target of, say, level 3 or 4 for a process, it means you need to put more effort, more resources, more rigor into making that process work well compared to maybe another process where a lower target, like level 1 or 2, is perfectly fine.
Got it. So it directs your focus and resources. Can you give us an example from the guide how a specific factor might boost an objective's priority?
Absolutely. The guide gives some great illustrations. For instance, if your enterprise is very risk-averse, that's its risk profile design factor, then that's going to push up the priority for objectives dealing with risk and security. Things like EDMs 03, Ensured Risk Optimization, APO 12, Managed Risk, APO 13, Managed Security, and DSSO 5, Managed Security Services. Those become critical.
Okay, makes sense.
Or, another one, if your threat landscape is high, maybe you're in a sector that's heavily targeted, then objectives like APO 13 Managed Security and DSSO 5 Managed Security Services become paramount. You need really capable security processes.
Right, absolutely essential.
And one more, if IT plays a strategic role in your business, meaning it's key to future success, not just keeping the lights on,
Yeah.
then that factor pushes up the importance of things like aligning IT strategy with business strategy, that's APO 02, managed strategy, and ensuring strong relationships between the business and IT teams, APO 8, managed relationships.
Okay, that paints a clear picture. The why behind prioritizing. So design factors tell you which objectives matter most and how good their processes need to be. What's the second type of impact?
The second impact is component variation. So the design factors might tell you that you need specific adaptations of those generic components we talked about earlier.
Tailoring the building blocks themselves.
Exactly. The guide uses the example of smaller enterprises, SMEs. The enterprise size factor might indicate that the full complexity of, say, organizational structures defined in the core model isn't necessary. You might use a simplified set, maybe guided by a specific COBIT focus area publication that's geared towards SMEs.
Okay, adapting the components. And the third impact.
The third one is pointing towards specific focus areas. Certain design factors can act as signposts, directing you to leverage more detailed guidance from specific COBIT focus area publications.
Like what? What are these focus areas?
The guide mentions several, like information security, DevOps, cloud computing, digital transformation, SME governance, even vendor management. So if your threat landscape factor is high, or your sourcing model relies heavily on third parties, or you're using DevOps methods, those factors strongly suggest you should dive into the specific COBIT guidance available for those topics.
Perfect. So factors prioritize objectives, adapt components, and point to specialized guidance. It definitely sounds like a structured process. How does the guide actually suggest you do this? Put these factors to work.
Yeah, it lays out a pretty clear proposed 4-step workflow. It's worth noting, though, that the guide says you don't always have to do every single sub-step in exhaustive detail for every single governance project. If you have a very specific focus, you might adapt the workflow. But the full 4 steps give you the comprehensive approach.
Okay, let's walk through those 4 steps then as the guide presents them. Step 1.
Step 1 is understand the enterprise context and strategy. Simple aim, but crucial. The main goal here is to really clearly capture the essence of your enterprise. What's its strategy? What are its key goals? What's its risk profile look like? And what are the current significant INT-related issues or pain points?
And this step uses specific design factors to get that understanding.
Yes, this first step really zooms in on those initial 4 design factors we listed: enterprise strategy, enterprise goals, risk profile, and INT-related issues.
Okay.
And a key piece of advice the guide gives here is about being selective with enterprise goals. Don't try to map dozens of goals with equal importance. Pick a manageable number, maybe a few primary ones, some secondary ones.
Why is that important?
Because COBIT uses this goals cascade idea, where enterprise goals link down to INT goals, which then link to the objectives. If you have too many top-level enterprise goals all marked as high priority, that cascade kind of loses its power to help you really focus and prioritize the INT objectives effectively. Gets diluted.
Ah, makes sense. Keep it focused. The guide provides examples of what these step 1 inputs might look like, right? Can we touch on those?
It does, and they're really helpful. Let's look at the 3 main examples used throughout the guide.
Okay.
Example 1 is a manufacturing company. Their strategy. It leans towards cost leadership and client service.
Yeah.
So their top enterprise goals are heavily focused on optimizing costs and their key INT issues. Things like frequent incidents, problems managing outsourcers, and just not having a clear view of the hidden or overall IT costs.
Right, very operational focus.
Example 2 is an innovative company. Strategy here is all about innovation and growth. So their priority goals are around developing competitive products, managing the risks that come with innovation, ensuring compliance, and needing reliable information. They're big risks. Investment risk, finding the right expertise, and the risk of innovation projects failing, and their INT issues. Also incidents, but also project delays, budget overruns, complex architecture, and data quality problems.
Okay, quite different. And the third one?
Example 3 is a government agency. Strategy is a mix of client service and cost leadership. Now, because they're in the public sector and, crucially, they had a recent major security breach, they have a very high focus on risk and compliance. And IT is seen as strategic.
Ah, that hack is key context.
Absolutely. Their INT issues flow directly from that incident, major security concerns, but also friction between the business units and IT, challenges with outsourcers, cost pressures, and data quality.
You can really see how different the starting points are just from step 1. So once you've captured all that context, what's next?
That brings us to step 2. Determine the initial scope. This is where you take all that information from step 1 and translate it into a first draft, basically.
Yeah.
A preliminary set of prioritized governance and management objectives.
Okay. How do you make that translation? Does the guide offer tools or methods?
Yes, the guide explains that this often involves using mapping tables. You'll find these in the appendices of the design guide. They show the established relationships between things like specific enterprise goals or risk categories and the relevant COBIT objectives. And importantly, the guide references a companion toolkit. It's an Excel tool, which really helps apply these mappings. It often uses quantitative methods to actually score how relevant each objective is based on those step 1 inputs you gathered.
Okay, so it helps automate that scoring based on the mappings. What were the initial top priority objectives that came out for those 3 examples after step 2?
All right, so for the manufacturing company, based on their cost focus, service needs, and operational issues, the initial high priority list included objectives like BAIR-09, managed assets, DSSO2, managed service requests and incidents, DSSO3, managed problems, BI10, managed configuration, and APO12, managed risk. Very operational and risk-focused.
Yeah, that fits. What about the innovative company?
Their focus on innovation, growth, strategy, and their specific risks and project issues led to an initial scope highlighting objectives like APO04, managed innovation, APO03, managed enterprise architecture, APO5, managed portfolio, APO02, managed strategy, and BAI11, managed projects.
Yeah.
Much more about planning, building, and strategy.
Totally different flavor. And the government agency?
For them, the big security incident, the compliance needs, and their risk profile really pushed security and risk objectives to the forefront initially. So things like APO13, managed security, APO12, managed risk, DSSO2, incidents again, BIO4, managed availability and capacity, and BIR09, managed assets.
Wow, it's fascinating how distinct those initial lists are, purely driven by their step 1 context. And presumably, this initial scope might also hint at important components, too.
Exactly. Step 2 gives you that first cut, that initial picture of what seems to matter most based on strategy, goals, risk, and issues.
But wait, we still have those other 7 design factors we listed earlier. Threat landscape, compliance, role of IT, and so on. That must be step 3.
You got it. Step 3 is refine the scope. Now you bring in those remaining factors. Threat landscape, compliance requirements, role of IT, sourcing model for IT implementation methods like Agile or Waterfall, technology adoption strategy like first mover or follower, and enterprise size.
Okay, and how do these refine that initial list from step 2? Same process with mapping tables.
Pretty much, yes. You analyze these factors, again, often using mapping tables provided in the later appendices of the guide, appendices F through K. These tables show how these factors influence the objective priorities. This step can also more clearly identify if you need specific component variations or if particular focus areas are really relevant. The output is a set of potential adjustments or refinements to that initial Step 2 design.
Okay, let's see how this played out in the examples. How did Step 3 change things for them?
Right, so for the manufacturing company, considering factors like a high-threat landscape and their IT role being mainly a factory reliable operations, this heavily reinforced the importance of the security, risk, and operational stability objectives they already had. Plus, their outsourcing model added significant weight to objectives around managing vendors and services. So, Step 3 solidified and slightly expanded their initial focus.
Made it more robust.
For the innovative company, Step 3 was actually quite transformative. They had a high-threat landscape, a strategic IT role, they used a cloud sourcing model, employed DevOps and Agile methods, and had a first-mover tech adoption strategy.
Wow, lots of dynamic factors.
Exactly. And collectively, these factors dramatically increased the importance scores for objectives across almost all the domains, but particularly plan, APO, build, BAI, and deliver, DSS. It wasn't just about innovation anymore. It was about secure, rapid, strategic delivery.
Ah, okay.
This step also strongly suggested they needed specific components, maybe a chief digital officer role, staff with very specific skills for agility and cloud, and processes designed for fast exploration and deployment. And it clearly flagged several focus areas as relevant: information security, DevOps, cloud, digital transformation, big in tech,
Yeah.
and the government agency.
All right.
For them, analyzing the high threat, high compliance requirements, and the strategic role of IT strongly reinforced the priorities around security, risk, compliance, and strategic planning that already came out in Step 2. It basically doubled down on those areas.
Yeah.
Their large enterprise size suggested the standard COBIT components were mostly okay,
Yeah.
but tailored organizational structures might still be needed. And the high threat and compliance factors made risk management and information security absolutely essential focus areas to consult.
So Step 3 really adds a lot more texture and can significantly shift or reinforce the priorities based on these very specific operational and contextual factors. What's the final step then? How do you pull it all together?
That's Step 4. Conclude the governance system design. This is where you bring everything together from Steps 2 and 3. You look at the combined picture, address any conflicts or maybe diverging priorities that emerge between the initial scope and the refinements.
Conflicts, like...
Well, maybe Step 2 prioritize something highly based on goals, but Step 3 factors slightly lowered its relative importance compared to, say, a security objective that shot up due to threat landscape. You need to reconcile that.
Okay.
So you discuss these results with key stakeholders, get their input and buy-in, and then finalize the tailored design.
This sounds like it needs more than just running the numbers through the toolkit. There's judgment involved here.
Absolutely. The guide is clear on this. While the toolkit and mappings provide quantitative suggestions, Step 4 requires analysis and informed judgment. You need to align the final design with what the enterprise is actually trying to achieve with this whole governance initiative. You might need to consciously adjust some automatically generated priorities based on that deeper business understanding or strategic imperatives.
Right. Common sense check.
Exactly. The final output of Step 4 is that agreed-upon, finalized list, prioritized objectives, the recommended target capability levels for their processes, any identified needs for specific component variations or unique designs, and the list of relevant COBIT focus areas you should use for detailed guidance during implementation.
Okay, can you give us a quick snapshot of the final picture for our 3 examples after they completed Step 4? What did the finished design look like?
Sure. For the manufacturing company, the final top objectives stayed heavily focused on operations and security. DSS-02 incidents, APO-13 security, DSS-04 continuity, DSS-03 problems, BAI-09 assets, and BAI-10 configuration. Their target capability levels for these key processes were set quite high, like levels 3 or 4, and specific components identified included needing a formal security committee and a CISO role. Relevant focus areas were InfoSec and vendor management.
Okay, very focused.
The innovative company's final design reflected that broad impact from Step 3. Many objectives saw increased importance. Top ones included APO-3 architecture, APO-04 innovation, APO-7 managed HR for INT skills, BAI-10 configuration, BAI-03 solution build, and BAI-07 change acceptance. Target levels were also set high, 3 to 4, for many critical innovation, build, and change processes. Specific components like the CDO role, required skills, and adaptive processes were key takeaways, and their relevant focus areas were quite broad. Potentially SME guidance plus InfoSec, DevOps, cloud, and digital transformation.
Much broader scope reflects their strategy.
And the government agency. Their final objectives list was, as expected, heavily weighted to security, risk, compliance, operations, and strategy. Top objectives included APO 13, APO 12, DSSO 2, BAIR 4, BR 99. Interestingly, APO's 02, Managed Strategy, also became highly prioritized after discussion in Step 4, specifically because of IT's strategic role and the need to rebuild business IT alignment post-incident.
Ah, so that adjustment happened in Step 4.
Exactly. Their target capability levels were strategically set, maybe setting core EDM and APO processes to level 3, even if the tool suggested lower, but pushing critical risk and security processes to target level 4. They also designed specific organizational structures like a strategic management council and an IT leadership board as vital components. And risk management and information security were confirmed as highly relevant focus areas.
Those examples really drive home how the workflow produces genuinely distinct, tailored results. So you finish Step 4, you have this tailored blueprint. What does the guide say happens next? Where do you go from here?
Right, so the design guide itself is meant to be used hand in hand with the other main COBIT 2019 publication, the implementation guide.
Ah, okay. Design first, then implement.
Exactly. The design guide tells you what your ideal tailored governance system should look like for your specific context. The implementation guide then gives you the detailed roadmap for actually implementing that tailored design and also for optimizing it over time, focusing on continuous improvement.
So the design guide is the what to build blueprint, and the implementation guide is the how to build it and keep it running manual.
That's a perfect way to put it. The implementation guide lays out different phases, covering everything from the initial planning, you're getting that crucial executive sponsorship, right through to sustaining momentum and making governance part of the normal way of working. It really stresses treating implementation like a proper managed program.
Needs that high-level backing. And you mentioned a toolkit earlier, that Excel tool.
Yes, the guide refers to that companion Excel toolkit throughout. Its main job is to help you apply the workflow we've just walked through, especially the more quantitative bits, assessing the impacts of the design factors, and helping to systematically prioritize the objectives based on those mappings. The examples we discussed, those were generated using the toolkit as shown in the guide.
Got it. Well, this deep dive into the COBIT 2019 design guide has been incredibly illuminating. It really clarifies the structure, the workflow, how you get from that generic framework to something truly customized.
And that really is its core value. It offers a practical, structured method. It makes you systematically think through those key design factors, strategy, risk, IT's role, all of it, that make your enterprise what it is. And by doing that, you ensure your efforts in governing and managing INT are actually focused on what matters most for your specific situation, instead of just, trying to force fit a standard model.
And that tailoring, it really feels essential for effectiveness, doesn't it? A governance system just has to align with the organization's strategy, its risk appetite, how it operates day to day. Otherwise, what's the point?
It's absolutely fundamental for effective EGI. The design guide provides that crucial blueprint for achieving that alignment.
So the design guide shows you what governance should ideally look like for your unique enterprise, based on all those factors, giving you that tailored blueprint. But here's a final thought for you to consider, something to chew on. The real challenge, maybe the bigger one, often lies in the how. The implementation part, the stuff the other guide covers. Given all the complexities we've seen revealed, just by considering those design factors, different strategies, threats, IT roles, adoption speeds, how can organizations effectively translate this carefully tailored design into sustained, practical, day-to-day operations? And maybe even more importantly, into genuine culture change across the whole organization. Designing the system is one thing.
Making it live and breathe is quite another. That's a critical question, absolutely. The design sets the direction, but that journey of implementation, embedding it deep into the enterprise's DNA, that's where the success is really forged or lost.